This is Nicky Lopez. He's currently on the Chicago White Sox, and he's bounced around a few different teams in the last couple years. This video isn't about a potential 2024 breakout or anything, but I came across something I did not remember happening back in 2021. So flashback to sometime in mid-December, I was beginning work on my 7th video titled The Bizarre World of Former Switch Hitting. In this video, I have a pretty extensive section about Cedric Mullins and his breakout season in 2021. In case you didn't see it, I mentioned how Mullins accumulated 5.9 F-WAR that year, placing him 15th overall in the league and 12th in the league among just position players. But as I was researching that part, I saw someone right above him at exactly 6.0 WAR, Nicky Lopez. I don't remember this at all. I've known about Nicky Lopez for years, obviously, but I seriously do not remember him being one of the best players in the league that year, let alone just among position players. No MVP votes, no Silver Slugger, no Gold Glove, just 6 F-WAR. I knew immediately I had to do something with this. At first glance at the stats, how did this happen? The hitting stats were nothing spectacular. He hit 2 home runs, and had a below average slugging percentage. Again, I find myself asking, how did this happen? That's what we're getting into today. We're going to analyze how sometimes wins above replacement leads to seemingly random players being recognized, how Nicky Lopez's career looked before and after this, an analysis of WAR in general, and of course the anomaly of the random time that Nicky Lopez had a 6 WAR season. Wins above replacement, or WAR. It's sometimes a commonly debated metric in the baseball world for a few reasons. First of all, it's semi-new, at least in the terms of people accepting it as a stat they can rely on. Regardless of when WAR was really first made, because of its ever-growing adoption by fans in the 21st century, any non-traditional MLB stats and metrics like that are going to be rejected by a decent amount of people. Second, it's meant to be all-encompassing, in the sense that it's meant to take all the contributions a player makes to their team and put it all together as a single stat. Some people don't really think it values things correctly. The fact that there are 2 different widely used types of WAR, sometimes having a large disparity between them, doesn't help disprove that. I like WAR, but there are certain scenarios for it. WAR is nice and quick. I can just be like, alright, let me quickly look at how a player did in a season or over the course of their career, and I see their WAR and I'm like, okay, that's all I need to know. Another example is it also helps to compare the value of a pitcher to a position player, but for some scenarios, it doesn't cut it for me. I do like to use it when I evaluate players, but you might notice I'm usually expanding on it in my videos whenever I do use it. Main reason for that is it just lacks context. I want to fully understand and have other people fully understand exactly how a player contributed to their team, and WAR doesn't do that. For example, in 2023, Corbin Carroll had 6 wins above replacement, and Francisco Lindor also had 6 wins above replacement. That's simple enough, and if you know these 2 players, you can likely come to a conclusion on what aspects of their game contributed to that, but not everyone does. For people who might not know every single detail of every single player, it tells you that Lindor and Carroll had about the same amount of contribution to their team's success, but not how. It gets more interesting when you get into that how. Carroll had clearly better offensive stats than Lindor. I wouldn't say a lot better, but there's a decent gap here. Nevertheless, Lindor has been one of the league's best defenders and easily one of the most important defensive positions on the field. He leads shortstops in ultimate zone rating and is still high up there in defensive runs saved and outs above average. Carroll, on the other hand, doesn't really stand out defensively. It's not bad, but just doesn't match up to Lindor, especially given their positional differences. Lastly, there's the base running. Based on Carroll's reputation, it seems like this should be a landslide, but Lindor was one of the league's best base runners last year as well. They end up with similar production, but different paths to get there. So for the way I make my videos, I like to use WAR as a setup for a deeper dive into the player. So I can understand if someone doesn't like to use WAR at all. Not because it's inaccurate or anything, but because of the fact that it lacks context, and I think that can be kind of boring sometimes. But why am I saying all of this? Well, because WAR is all-encompassing, and since people love to hone in on just offensive stats for position players, it makes a season like Nicky Lopez's in 2021 look like an anomaly. How could it be possible that the first time a guy hits just slightly above average, he becomes one of the elite players in the league? That's one of the goals here today. We gotta dive deeper into how Nicky Lopez pulled it off. But before all that, I want to go a little further back into his career to figure out how we got here. In 2016, Nicky Lopez was drafted out of college in the 5th round by the Kansas City Royals. 5th round usually doesn't show signs of high expectations out the get-go, but minor league results can easily catapult a lower round pick up the prospect rankings. Let's take a look at Lopez's scouting grades before we move on to his minor league results. So for a little overview of scouting grades in case you're unfamiliar, MLB.com has a grading scale from 20 to 80. According to them, a 50 grade is average, 40 is below average, and 20 to 30 is well below average, while 60 is above average, and a 70 to 80 grade is well above average. So it's pretty clear how this works. Lopez didn't really stand out exceptionally across all his grading, being a bit above average in hitting, running, arm strength, and fielding. However, the power grade was a 30, which is well below average. Now, these scouting grades are never set in stone. Mookie Betts had a 45 grade on his power, and he just hit 39 home runs in his age 30 season. Players can always improve, but it was still decently clear early on where Lopez's value was going to come from as a position player. He's likely not going to slug, he's not going to hit tanks, you just gotta hope he creates value everywhere else. Lopez's minor league years did cause him to steadily move up the Royals' prospect rankings, eventually landing him at his highest ranking of 6th in the team's farm in 2018. The power never really changed all that much, but he was seriously impressive when it came to getting on base. Lopez had multiple years of minor league stints before he was first called up, and while his walk rate varied sometimes, it was pretty solid and was carrying his OPS. His on-base percentage was .348 in 2017, .382 in 2018, and in a really good 2019 stretch of only 31 games, .457. Let's take a closer look at that really good stretch in the minors in 2019 as well. In 31 games, he slashed .353, .457, .500 for an OPS of .957. Easily the highest of all his slash lines were in any major league stint, and also by far his highest OPS. So we got low strikeouts, solid walk rate, good contact, great defense, and good speed. Available all across the infield too, made it clear that Lopez was more than making up for a lack of power. On May 13th, 2019, the Royals announced they were promoting Lopez to the big leagues. Lopez made his MLB debut the next day, May 14th, 2019. He went 1 for 4 with a single, a walk, and got an RBI. A great first game, but overall the first season wasn't super great. That walk rate I was gushing about didn't really translate immediately. He had a 14.5% walk rate in those limited games in AAA in 2019, and that turned into a 4.5% walk rate in the majors. Pretty huge drop off. And while that minor league stint was a small sample, it's still a hefty drop-off from his time in AAA in 2018 as well. Beyond the walk rate, the rest of the splits weren't quite there either. He slashed .240, .276, .325 for an OPS of .601. We knew the slugging wasn't going to be elite, but the average and on-base percentage are what really make this an OPS plus of 58, 42% below league average. In this scenario, you hope for a silver lining elsewhere. Unfortunately though, it wasn't all there defensively either. He played mostly second base in 2019, but did have his fair share of innings at shortstop and ended up with -2 defensive runs saved and 1 out above average. This results in both his B-WAR and F-WAR being just below replacement level. I say this with every player, it was the first year. You figure out what went wrong and you improve for the future. So of course, a shortened 2020 season is not likely to help a struggling rookie out in their sophomore campaign. In 2020, Lopez's walk rate shot back up, which was great, but everything else dropped even further, which was not so great. He started striking out a lot more, although it was a small sample size, and you could see from his past and future seasons that 2020 is just an outlier here. Lopez only missed 4 games in 2020, and at this point he was still basically a full-time second baseman. In 56 games, Lopez slashed .201, .286, .266 for an OPS of .552, and an OPS plus of 51. Although we have an improvement to the walks, the hitting itself got much worse, and overall the production was worse than in 2019. A lot more work still needed to be done if Lopez wanted to continue as a regular on the team. There's also the really unfortunate fact that Lopez got caught stealing in each of his 5 stolen base attempts, which is obviously really bad, and the above average speed still isn't panning out. As I mentioned earlier, because of the lack of power and slugging, he's going to be behind other players offensively, and so everything else has to work at a decent to high level for him to be able to produce. We do have a silver lining this time though, and that's the defense. There were some huge improvements this year on the defensive side, with Lopez amassing 9 defensive runs saved and 8 outs above average at second base. Although his 20 innings at shortstop bring those numbers down slightly overall, still, it was much better than last year. And coming away from a season with worse offensive stats, improved defense has to be at least a little bit of a win. For this year, the WAR wasn't anything great, but he was a bit over replacement level from both versions at least. There was a significant amount left to be desired, and next year is when things were going to change. A lot. Going into the 2021 season, spring training was kind of the last chance for Lopez to try and maintain a starting spot on the team. But in 16 games that spring, he only managed 4 hits, one of those being a double, and slashed 118, 231, 147 for an OPS of 378. At that point, they were hitting territory that was going to be worse than just missing out on a starting spot. This is why on March 28th, 4 days before opening day, the Royals optioned Lopez to AAA to start the year. At this point, Whit Merrifield, who was mostly playing in the outfield the last few years, took over the second base position yet again. A little bit before Lopez was optioned to the minors, an MLB.com article reporting his spring training woes featured some quotes from him about the process he's been going through. Lopez said, "Obviously, it's not the spring I've been looking to have, but it's definitely been a process where I'm learning a lot and learning about myself, and I've been working hard with hitting coaches John Mabry and Terry Bradshaw. I'd be lying to say it's easy to stay positive during that, but you want to see some production. You want to see yourself driving balls and getting on base, but you have to take some positives out of it." As I said, these quotes were taken from a little bit before he was sent down, and it's likely that the Royals saw that he just needed some more time to work on the swing. Then, just a day before the season, Lopez needed to come back up to the Major League roster. Adalberto Mondesi, who had been logging a lot of games at shortstop in the seasons prior, was put on the IL the same day. Mondesi officially had a right oblique strain, and he didn't play a game until the end of May. The Royals needed someone to fill the spot. You hate to see another player sustain an injury, but Lopez was given another chance. Mike Matheny, the Royals manager at the time, said this about Nicky Lopez: "It's going to take some time and some work, and what we're telling him is, go be you on the field, on the defensive side of the field. We need you to go out there and play a great shortstop for us, and then be prepared to do the little things that you can do to help us win a ball game when you're at the plate." It was clear what the Royals' perspective was on Lopez's offense at this point. They knew it still had a long way to go, but they needed someone to fill in now. So, starting the season at shortstop and spending the majority of his time there, Lopez had his best season yet. Although he was hitting as low as .224 on June 12th, Mondesi had a hamstring injury at the end of May and another oblique injury in June. So Lopez mostly stuck around year-round, even with a below-average start to the season. In the second half, though, the hitting got much better and Lopez ended his season of 151 games, slashing 300, 365, 378, with an OPS of 744 and an OPS plus of 104. In the grand scheme of things, it's league average hitting, but that's a significant boost from where he was at the last 2 years. We knew they weren't focusing on power or anything like that, but he was finally getting hits and also getting walks. His 8.7% walk rate is just a bit below what he did the year prior, but we're talking about almost 100 more games to be fair. But we all know 6 WAR is not being accumulated through just this offense, so you know he must have been producing elsewhere, and he was. Before I get to the defense, let's talk about Lopez's base running. So, I've been mentioning his stolen base and caught stealing stats for each of his first 2 years, which means prior to this season, he had a total of 1 stolen base versus 6 times that he was out trying to steal. But this year, Lopez was only caught stealing a single time, and he swiped 22 bags overall. I don't even need to bring up the optimal stolen base rate on this one. That's obviously great stolen base numbers. But let's look at Lopez's BSR in the last few years to see how these stolen bases translated to his WAR. If you don't know about BSR, it literally just stands for base running or base running runs, and it's a similar kind of statistic to defensive stats. They'll go above and below 0, where 0 is the average. It's more than just stolen bases though. It takes into account all base running situations. Smart base running decisions can go a long way, and you don't have to be the fastest guy in the field to make those decisions. I personally like to use it because it not only goes beyond just stolen bases when looking at base running, but also because this is how base running gets incorporated into FWAR. But visuals help here, so here's the BSR rankings for 2021. And look who it is, Nicky Lopez sitting at 4th in the entire league that year. 4th best in the league on the base pass will certainly help your production, that's for sure. But we've got one more big thing to look at, and that's the defense. In 2021, at just shortstop, Lopez had 3 defensive runs saved. Pretty good, but not really better than last year. However, he had 26 outs above average. This was easily the most outs above average from a single player in 2021 across all positions, let alone just among shortstops. It also shapes up to be one of the best defensive seasons in the brief history so far of outs above average. So I think it's kind of a robbery that he wasn't able to win the Gold Glove that year in 2021. I know his defensive run save shows an entirely different thing here, but still, his outs above average made such a big impact that this season wasn't actually 6 WAR originally, which I know sounds weird, but I'll explain. In April of 2022, Fangraphs began incorporating fielding runs prevented into their WAR calculations, which is a stat converted from outs above average to help properly quantify someone's range on defense. It basically just means that they started including outs above average in their WAR. Before this, I believe they were only using ultimate zone rating, and now they're being used in tandem. So now FWAR has fielding that's calculated through the range of outs above average, and the rest is with ultimate zone rating like it was before. But this obviously occurred right at the start of the 2022 season, and half a year after the conclusion of the 2021 season. When this happened though, it caused some past seasons to start including that player's outs above average if it was something that was available, which led to many guys getting a boost or drop in WAR because of it. I actually struggled a bit to find Lopez's old FWAR number before they made this change, but luckily Fangraphs posted an article highlighting some of their then new calculations' biggest changes. Here's their list of the biggest single season FWAR changes from 2016 to 2021, now that it includes outs above average. So now we know from this that Lopez initially had 4.4 FWAR after the 2021 season, and now it's 6. I mean, 6 FWAR is pretty damn high and really unexpected, but you might not remember it like I didn't because it wasn't technically 6 WAR until about half a year later. Although, don't get me wrong, 4.4 FWAR is still really impressive, but it makes sense now that this wasn't something I noticed before because it changed 6 months later. So overall, 4.4 BWAR and 6.0 FWAR for Lopez's breakout season where he hit just 2 home runs. I mentioned a few times that since Lopez was never really going to make waves with his slugging, he needed to be well above average at everything else to match the production of some of the best players in the league. So he basically did that. League average hitting, elite defense, and elite base running. That's why Lopez had 6 WAR. It seems odd, but it's easy for people to forget that some of the best hitters aren't putting up 26 outs above average and top of the league base running. It's certainly not common, but I would say seasons like this are not entirely unprecedented to see, just a little bit under the radar. We're taking a quick detour from the rest of Lopez's career to look at a recent example that I thought was very similar to Lopez's 2021. Because if you know my channel, I just like to do that. Just this past year, we saw a similar situation unfold with Ha-Seong Kim on the San Diego Padres. I want to look at this season in direct comparison to Lopez's, so we'll start off with the hitting. Hitting-wise, things line up pretty well here. They were both well above average at getting on base, but were held back in the slugging department severely. In comparison to the rest of the league, this led to only a 6-point difference in their OPS+, so pretty similar hitting stats overall and quite similar approaches. By comparing their batted ball data, this is only reinforced. Low strikeouts, high contact with a lack of focus on power, and not much whiffing or chasing. The large difference here is the walk rate, but Lopez mostly made up for this by getting more hits. All in all, I think their hitting profiles are super similar, and they both made up for their hitting through the other aspects of the game. Where things get different though is the fielding, and that's what makes their seasons a little bit different too. Kim did get almost 6 WAR, but he had accumulated almost 6 BWAR instead of FWAR. Funnily enough, Kim's 2023 and Lopez's 2021 are almost an exact reverse of one another when looking at their WAR. Kim had 4.4 FWAR while Lopez had 4.4 BWAR, and then Kim had 5.8 B-WAR to Lopez's 6.0 F-WAR. Extremely similar, but reversed. There's actually an easy answer to why that happened though, and it's likely because Kim's DRS was closer to the top of the league than his outs above average and ultimate zone rating were. Kim had 16 defensive runs saved across second base, third, and shortstop, although with most of his season being at second. Don't get me wrong, the outs above average was still great with 9, but it doesn't match up to Lopez's 26, and that's likely why his F-WAR was lower. So to put it simply, Lopez had better outs above average and therefore better F-WAR, while Kim had better defensive runs saved and therefore better B-WAR. It's all about which fielding stats they were more proficient in. It can be a bit confusing to keep track of, but that's the life we live here with baseball. We've got one last thing here, and that's base running. For both Fangraphs BSR and Baseball Reference's own version of base running runs, Lopez remains ahead of Kim. Kim did steal 16 more bags, but he also had 8 more situations where he was caught stealing, which makes a pretty big difference, as getting caught stealing is a larger detriment than most people realize. But Kim still had a great year on the base pass, and that helped out his WAR a lot. I think these are very similar seasons. Two infielders who could play across the infield from second to third to short, both had just above league average hitting, some of the best in the league base running, and elite defense. I guess I could have made this video about Kim if I wanted to, but I think the F-WAR changes for Lopez made his season very unnoticeable. And I also think I talk about Padres players too much. Also, Lopez has 2 more years after his breakout season to look at, 2 more years that weren't the same. But I also said at the very start that he's on a completely different team now as well. So what happened in the next few years, and why weren't things able to stay the same? After 2021, Lopez was not able to replicate the results of his surprise breakout season. In fact, he was never able to get very close to it. Negative 0.3 B-WAR and 1.2 F-WAR is all he ended up with to follow it up in 2022. Given the fact that he was one of the Royals' best players the year prior, it made sense that he played most of the season still. This time though, with Bobby Witt Jr. coming up to the big leagues, Lopez played all across the infield, logging a fair share of games at second, third, and shortstop. Across all 3 of his positions, he had -7 defensive runs saved, with -8 of those coming from second base, 1 from third, and 0 from short. However, it's clear that Nicky Lopez is doing something that StatCast loves, because he had 14 outs above average across all those positions. Another year where outs above average favors him over defensive runs saved. Still though, it wasn't close to the 26 outs above average he had the year before. Although, it's a hilarious thing to say that 14 outs above average is not close to his best. His base running runs were also a little bit lower, but not enough to create such a large gap in that production. What it truly comes down to is simply the offensive stats. In 141 games, Lopez slashed .227, .281, .273 for an OPS of .554, as well as an OPS plus of 58. The hitting went back down, the walks went down, and he had just 16 extra base hits the entire year. But still, Lopez went from everything coming together to a large step back across the board, some being larger than others. In his best year, his defense and base running were able to carry his offense, but a combination of severely low offense and worse defense and base running is what made that season what it is. Now going into 2023, and not enough changed yet again. His playing time was seriously limited this year, and the Royals traded him to the Braves in late July, where he was obviously going to get an even smaller role. In 93 games, Lopez slashed .231, .326, .307 for an OPS of .632 and an OPS plus of 75. At this rate, it's pretty clear the hitting has just not taken the steps to get back to where they were in 2021. He ended up with 1.8 B-WAR and 1.1 F-WAR in 2023, but in a little less than 100 games. I will say that the walk rate was the highest of his major league career thus far, but other than the K rate that I covered earlier, the defense was essentially the one thing that stayed moderately consistent, even if he was never able to reach the heights of 2021. However, those heights are what was extremely vital in that 6-WAR season in combination with much better hitting. So even though he had only a 104 OPS plus, 2021 was an outlier year when it came to his offense. But how exactly? Well, one of the easiest answers is BABIP, or batting average on balls in play. BABIP is something commonly used when trying to understand if a player is lucky or unlucky. The simple thing you need to know is that it's generally considered that a 300 BABIP is league average. However, skill plays a factor here, and the best players will have a higher BABIP naturally, and worse players will have lower ones. There's a lot that goes into determining the luck from BABIP that makes it a bit harder for me to just make it simple, but if we take a look at the BABIP rankings for 2021, we can see that Lopez ended up 11th highest in the league at 347. So generally, comparing this success to that player's other years will give us clearer answers. So let's lay out Lopez's BABIPs for each year of his career so far. As we can see, it's not only just significantly above the league average, it's significantly above what he has consistently done across his career. There's other factors that go into this, but there's a lot here that kind of shows that 2021 was an outlier when it came to hitting. The stars truly aligned that year for Nicky Lopez, and I'm not sure if it will happen again. So I don't think 6 WAR is in the cards for Nicky Lopez in 2024. This doesn't mean that he's an unproductive player though. I think his brand of baseball is a lot harder than people realize, as you truly have to be constantly at the top of your game everywhere else if you're not gonna slug. Whether people like it or not, there is a large correlation between hitting the ball hard and being one of the best hitters in the league. I mentioned earlier that people usually just hone in on offense, which is why seasons like this are surprising to see get so much WAR. Obviously, I'm one of those people, because I was surprised to see he had such a great season given what I knew about his hitting stats. The second I saw it, I knew his defense had to have been incredible. You know, not to mention the fact that it was 4.4 F-WAR until it was changed. We still know what he's capable of as a fielder and a base runner, so if his hitting stats improve yet again, don't be surprised if he starts racking up WAR yet again. But given the offense outside of 2021 and his low likelihood of having much of a chance to be a regular starter nowadays, I just don't see it happening. But you never know. Thanks for watching.